Okay, let's get rolling because I am so honored to have this guest on. Our first guest is Ron Felber. Ron is the author of 7 novels and 5 nonfiction books, including the Jack Matson crime thriller series, Il Dottore, the basis for the television series The Mob Doctor. The recipient of the UPI Award for Fiction, Ron was educated at Georgetown University, Loyola University of Chicago, and Drew University, where he earned his doctorate. After graduating, he worked as a deputy sheriff transporting federal criminals. He began his career writing articles based on his experiences for True Detective magazine. He went on to author 3 books for the Nick Carter series. He lives in New Jersey with his wife, Lorraine. Without any further delay, let's get him on the air. Ron, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe radio show, my friend.
Good to be here. How are you, Pat?
I'm doing good. How was your weather out east? We had like hurricane storms come through. I know Chicago got hit. I figured a lot of that stuff had to be moving out east, but you guys got hit with cold and everything else.
Yeah, it's been fairly cold weather. Although today the sun came out anyway. It's been that kind of gray, chilling cold. But it broke a little bit today. It was into the 30s, and there was some sunshine, which helped.
Well, that's good. It's nice to see that spring is here. Ron, again, it's an honor to have you on the show. I just scratched the surface with your bio, and I would like to talk about your books. Of course, the Mojave incident I found very interesting going through that. Why don't you give our listeners a little bit of background about how you got into writing and your life, and what brought you to writing books like the Mojave incident and other things that you do?
Sure. Well, like a lot of people, it goes way back. In the 6th grade or something, a teacher said, you're not the best writer, because we had an assignment to write, I guess, about our summer vacation or so, but you're the most unique. And so I took that as a compliment, and I think it was meant that way. And I started to write short stories so that by the time I was in high school, I'd published about 35 short stories. And then I went on to Georgetown. I met William Peter Blatty, who wrote The Exorcist. We became pretty good friends, and he helped me get a book published, my first novel published. I wrote then for the Nick Carter series because it was easier, frankly, to get books like that published because Nick Carter already had a following. So I did that and then branched out into a variety of different works, ranging from something like what executives can learn from 6th grade American presidents, a book called Presidential Lessons in Leadership, which was a business book, to Il Dottore, The Double Life of a Mafia Doctor, a story that was given to me by Bill Bonanno, the Bonanno crime family head.
Wow.
And also, of course, the Jack Matson series, which I have a new book coming out May 1st called Dark Angel. But the book that's been the most exciting and has created the most stir, as a matter of fact, it's #1 on Amazon in 4 categories right now, is Mojave Incident.
Wow, well, and that's why you're here, Ronnie. Everything that you do definitely write about interconnects with what our show has covered for so many years.
Yeah, and the way I got this story was sort of a strange one in the sense that the Giffords did not want to come forward. This was not something they wanted to talk about. They had really a morbid fear that people would mock them, and when they did tell their parents even, now this is a married couple with 2 children, upwardly mobile. The husband is a project manager for a very large construction firm, so he was doing shopping malls, and so these are really responsible jobs. Lise Gifford was a stay-at-home mom, had 2 young babies at the time, one 4 and one just 2, and they decided to take a camping trip, and when they get to the campsite, it's sold out, and they wind up going to a very desolate area of the Mojave Desert near the New York mountain range and Tabletop Mountain. And there they have one of the most incredible UFO alien abduction stories ever told. As a matter of fact, one of the reviewers called it the most frightening UFO book ever written.
Wow. Now, what time frame did this take place, Ron?
It took place in October 1989, and in the early 90s, I had them brought to Dr. Bernard Vitone, who was the director of the National Center of Psychiatry, who studied them for neuroses or, let's say, whether they were prone to fantasy, that sort of thing. And they were not. They checked out entirely, no psychosis, no neurosis, very stable individuals. But he did note that that they suffered insomnia, sexual dysfunction, high anxiety, and stress. And he compared it to the kind of post-traumatic stress POWs have after they've been held captive in a war environment. From there, I took them to William Annixter, Dr. William Annixter, medical doctor, and also a psychiatrist who specialized in retrogressive hypnosis. So basically what the Giffords went through were about 8 hours, 4 of them very torturous and conscious, and then another 4 or 5 hours that they couldn't remember. When they got back from their trip, they had terrible nightmares, and through retrogressive hypnosis, those last 5 hours or so were made clear, and that was about half of the story.
Interesting, Ron. How did you meet these people? What brought them to you, if you don't mind me asking?
Not at all. I was running a company at the time, a fairly large one, and it had a national sales force, actually a North American sales force, and a fellow that I hired was named Paul Moran. And Paul Moran was a football player at the University of Redlands, varsity football player, and his best friend, Tom Gifford, also was a all-state football player, and so they were best friends. He and his wife had this UFO alien abduction experience. They did not want to talk about it. They buried it deep inside, and Paul said, for their good, it might be good for them to tell this story, and for you as a writer, it would be great for you to have a story like this because it's an incredible true story. And at first I didn't want to do it because I that's not the kind of book I wrote.
Right.
But I did meet them, and they were so credible, and the story was so, I just had never heard anything that even vaguely resembled their story, and so I agreed to do it. They agreed to let me tape their account. And so I probably taped about 50 hours with them prior to going deeper into research with the medical doctors and the science that was involved.
Let me ask you, Ron, with the taping in that, of course, and I'm sure the book it goes through all of the details, all of the specs, the down and I shouldn't say down and dirty stuff, but the details.
Yes.
Did they ever was this stuff that they remembered, or did they have to be, brought through some form of regression therapy, or was this just from their own cognizance what they remembered happened to them that night?
Yeah, I would say that they had about a 4 or 5 hour experience that was conscious, totally conscious, where they were trapped and held captive in the back of their truck, and it had a shell, so it was a camper, and that was totally conscious to the point where they were pinching each other, saying, "Do you see what I see?"
Right.
And they felt like they were on the verge of cardiac arrest. They thought they were in hell. They didn't know what happened to them. And then they felt later into this, after they encountered the third type, there were 3 types of alien life forms. The third type was kind of an angelic presence that said, calm down, like a Marian visitation. Everything will be okay. You'll go home. You'll see your children. You won't die. They got very drowsy. They felt like the whole truck and the earth around them was being elevated and lifted up into a craft that was the size of a football field.
Wow. So, if we could, to set the stage, are they out there? Are the Giffords out there camping? Are they are they just out there for relaxation time?
Yeah, actually, this is the way it went. Being a young mother, Elise wanted to get out of the house, and so they went to a place called Whiskey Pete's, where they did a little bit of gambling, had a couple of drinks, listened to a band, and danced and whatnot. And then the second day of the trip was to have been a hunting trip, where Tom, who had missed a shot at a mule deer the season before, wanted to go back out after it. And again, this was a desolate area of the Mojave. When they went to Mid Hills campsite, very unusually, it was sold out. And so they decided they had little choice but to, in the night, go into the desert, deep into the desert. They built a campfire. They cooked up some steaks. They were roasting marshmallows, feeding the kangaroo rats, crumbs of bread and whatnot, and getting a kind of kick out of that. When they saw a shining object, they were stargazing, that looked brighter and larger than anything in the sky. That particular object was then joined by 8 others, and the 9 objects formed a sprawling M-shaped configuration over the New York mountain range, and they started blinking as if they were communicating to one another. Now, this is when they realized this was not stars. They realized that this was maybe a military exercise that they were in the middle of, but they certainly knew they were in grave danger.
Yeah, and again, like you said, this gentleman is a credible individual. He's not trying to get anything out of it. Again, someone that has their wits about them. It had to be pretty surreal, Ron. I mean, just to kind of end up in this situation.
Well, what happened then, and this is when let's say fear turned into panic. The 9 became hundreds of glowing objects, and they started dropping to the ground, slowly, dropping to the ground, and then rushing towards them. But what rushed towards them was not a white object. It was thousands of pairs of red eyes glowing in the dark. Now, they knew that the terrain was too rough for any wheeled vehicle to come like an onslaught like that.
Right.
And so Tom went into the back of the camper, got 2 shotguns that he had with him, a Remington and an Ithaca, and was ready to do battle with them. At that time, his wife started to get telepathic messages. Put the guns down, get in the back of the camper, and we won't hurt you. If you try to hurt us, we'll kill you. So she heard it first. Then her husband, Tom, heard it. And they went into the back of the camper. They sat there, Indian style, him with the guns over his lap. There were 2 sort of monitors, almost like fire hydrants, fire plugs, that were electrically charged. So when he tried to get out, he was jolted backwards by a very strong electrical shock. So they were trapped in the back of his camper. Around about that time, they looked up, and they saw a spacecraft. He describes the size of a football field or larger, like a floating city, that kind of size. And around them, the red eyes belonged to a kind of almost like gremlins, almost like monkey-like creatures that are just frolicking around them. But these are malevolent. They had a tremendous feeling of malevolence. So that was happening, and they were about scared to death. And the next set of beings were illuminated figures, they called them. They were about 5'5" in height, totally white and illuminated, large eyes, as we've heard described before, a mouth that was like a slit, 2 holes for a nose, no ears, 3 long, elongated fingers. And these 9 creatures put them through a mental torment where they were made to relive various sections of their life, and some that were exaggerated. For example, Elise Gifford had been molested as a child by a stranger when she was 8 years old. She was forced to relive that again. And these beings, like clinicians or scientists, studied their reaction as they were put through these various traumatic scenarios. Tom, for example, who was a hunter, was made to feel like he was being hunted, tracked, wounded, shot, and then skinned alive, as one would do with a deer or an animal that they'd caught. They felt at many times during these situations that they were going to have a heart attack, and so their hearts were pounding. They were talking to each other, sharing what was going on, and at that point, when they felt like they were about to die, like they were on the verge of cardiac arrest, a kind of fog-like mist came into the camper that was like a sedative that put their heart rate down and their pulse rate down so that they could survive. So literally, these beings, like scientists, keeping alive a laboratory experiment, would bring them to the brink of heart failure or insanity, and then sedate them so they could go on with their testing.
Interesting. And while they were experiencing these, I guess if you want to call them maybe telepathic scenes, which probably crossing in and out of reality, but yet they still kind of knew where they were. I would assume while they were seeing these images and feeling these feelings.
Well, actually, the scenarios they went through, they actually felt like they were living them. Wow. So for that period of time, they didn't feel like they were in the camper. Also, what was going on seemed to be a kind of mining operation, because from the bottom of the huge spacecraft, there was a beam of light, like a spotlight, maybe 200 feet in diameter, and from the bottom of the ship came a kind of triangular vehicle that started combing the desert basin, and a pungent odor. It smelled, they said, like sulfur, burning sulfur, or phosphorus. They had the distinct impression, because they felt like a drilling vibration in the ground, that there was a mining operation going on, and that this vehicle, which they called a searcher, was combing the desert basin, maybe in search of rare earths or certain minerals or elements. There are a lot of very particular critical minerals that are mined there from that desert. A lot of them are used in laser weaponry and in warfare. So lanthanum would be one, psyllium would be another. So rare elements. And so they really got the impression that while they were going through their torment, there was another operation going on that seemed to be a kind of mining operation.
Now, let me ask you this, Ron. Is it, at this point, has the craft lifted this piece of land up?
Not yet. You see, this is the conscious experience.
Okay. So
this goes on for hours.
They're sitting there. They're going through the different scenarios. They're obviously coming in and out of reality, or I guess they're in reality, but coming in and out of this, and they're observing this all at the same time.
Correct. Wow. So it's really, I call it like a curtain lifting on almost an alternate universe.
Gotcha.
It's more than a sighting or anything like that. This was a true, detailed, complex insight behind a curtain, behind a veil, into a reality that few people have ever seen, and no one that I know of or have read about has ever seen.
So after it was, yeah, exactly. To be part, it sounds like these poor people, well, possibly stumbled into this area. Maybe they were brought there by chance or by purpose. Who knows? Now, did you mention that the wife, was she with child at the time?
No.
Okay.
No, she had a 2-year-old child at home and a 4.5-year-old.
Okay.
But shortly thereafter, she did get pregnant, and actually, even beyond this experience, they felt like they were watched. And when she did get pregnant, under hypnosis, they both recalled that their bed was surrounded by alien beings, and that even though it wasn't the right time in her cycle, when after they'd had sex, her husband looked at her and said, "You're pregnant." And she said, "I know." And during hypnosis, they realized that they were being watched even then.
Wow. So with them being in the back of the camper, the mining going on, these flashbacks or scenarios, what happens next, Ron? Do they actually? I mean, are they actually physically abducted at this point?
Yeah. What happens next is another oddity, because there was a third type of being then. So while these sort of dwarfish, gremlin-type creatures with the red eyes, who seemed to get more and more excited, the more panicked the Giffords became, the more excited and elevated and frenetic these other sort of low-level beings became. The clinical beings, the illuminated figures, never showed any emotion whatsoever, just drilled down with their eyes into the camper at them. But just when they thought they were going to die, and they really thought they were going to be dead, an angelic presence arrives, and it's almost like a Marian visitation. Very feminine for sure. Mm-hmm. They definitely feminine, like a swirling sort of white robes, and this figure says, "Don't worry, you're not going to die. You will survive this. Everything's going to be all right." And at that time, the excited, frenetic actions of the gremlin-like creatures ceases, and the 9 illuminated figures start to recede and disappear, and everything starts to calm down. They get very, very drowsy, as if they're drugged, and what happens next is they feel, while this searcher is doing this drilling operations, these mining operations, they feel like the camper and all the earth around them is being lifted up into this enormous UFO, and that's where their memories stopped. That was their conscious experience.
Talk about not heaven and hell, but hell and heaven and back.
It's really a crazy scenario. And during the hypnotic sessions, one of the really incredible things Dr. Annixter asks Elise Gifford, who are these beings? Why are they here? And she talks about the One Supreme. She talks about 5 galaxies, that the mission is to eventually unite the 5 galaxies and have them live in harmony. And basically, when she was asked, well, when will this communication happen? She says, I don't know. And then the doctor says, well, will it happen in my lifetime? And then literally, almost in a voice that's not hers and with words that are not hers, she says, how long will you live? And then finally, he says, well, is there a way to measure when this will happen? And she says, in your child's lifetime, in your children's lifetime. So my definite impression is that, and she also said this, they don't have emotions like we do. So they need to study our emotions and to see how we react to things. And so whether literally there's an angelic presence, a diabolical presence, and these scientific illuminated figures, or if some of these beings, like the gremlins and like the angelic presence, were really there just to create fear, to create comfort, to create serenity, relief, all of these different emotions, to the nth degree. Perhaps they were put through this so that the aliens could study human emotions and better understand how to communicate and how to put forward a large-scale encounter with humanity.
Yes. One of our listeners writes in for you, Ron, and says, Ron, these beings, these little gremlin beings, does this couple feel that they were possibly a vision, or did they sense that these little beings, these gremlin beings with the red eyes, were actually physically there?
That's a very interesting question, and I'll try to give you a very interesting answer.
Okay.
Because just recently I asked Tom Gifford, you had a shotgun. If you shot one of these, what would happen?
Right.
Would it go through them, or were they physical so that in some way this would affect them? And his definite impression was that they were physical, On the other hand, while they were climbing branches of the Joshua trees and whatnot in the desert, the limbs didn't bend. And they noted that very specifically, both of them, from the back of the camper. So it's a good question, and the answer is that that the craft was physical, that they feel these particular beings were physical, but oddly enough, while they were frolicking and these malevolent red eyes were staring at them, they had the impression, and they're really on top of the truck, etc., that they were weightless in some way.
Huh. Did Tom ever think, Ron, if you've asked him this question, or did he ever think about taking that gun and opening fire, but maybe thinking he could just have World War III on his hands, literally? I mean, did he ever consider grabbing a firearm and just start firing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And basically what he got in spades were telepathic messages that this will do you no good. You know, you're totally, at our mercy.
Right.
Don't even try.
Interesting. So now at this point they've been abducted. They're in the craft.
Yep.
Does hypnotherapy, does it bring out some things? Does it bring out some
Absolutely.
tests?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, while they're sleeping, I mean, after this, weeks after this, they're having these nightmares, and one of the nightmares that Tom has is struggling with these white beings, that he's in the craft, that it's very illuminated, like the figures themselves, that they're on kind of a people mover, like an airport would have, and that he's fighting because he's separated from Elise, his wife, and feels very concerned for her well-being and wants to try to defend her. But he's like numbed and like in shock. And even though he's struggling, and during the hypnotic session, he was actually struggling. You could see him twisting in his chair. And so he would have these dreams, disturbing dreams. And same with Elise, even to the point where one evening at 3 a.m. or so, he wakes up and he sees a white being, an illuminated figure, putting his fingers, these 3 long fingers, over his wife's face. And he realizes he's not dreaming. And so he gets this message, you're dreaming. And he looks and he goes, I'm not dreaming, this is real. And he watches, they disappear, they turn the lights on, his wife goes to the mirror and she has 3 burn marks on her face from the fingers.
Wow. Unbelievable. Scary. I mean, just going through the little bit we're talking out of here is enough to scare the hell out of anybody.
Well, another time, they go into the room of their child. So they hear screaming, hysterical screaming from their oldest son, who was about 5 at the time. And they walk in the room, and he's spinning like a top. And so she runs to him, gathers him up in her arms, calms him down, puts him back in bed, and she's about to turn the lights out. He said, don't turn the lights out. And she says, why? She goes, because when you turn the lights out, the monsters come. And he goes, she goes, there are no monsters. Yes, there are. They're little, and they have red eyes.
Wow. And this is something she never shared with her children.
No, of course not. I mean, just too scary.
Yeah.
But they felt like they were watched, and they still feel like they're watched.
Let me ask you this, Ron, the old age-old question. When of course, so many people that have gone through abduction scenarios or contact scenarios, they tend to sometimes look back and see that this is something that has not just happened in the Mojave Desert at this incident, but it's been something that's going on for years. Do Tom and Elise feel that this is something that now has been happening maybe their whole life?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I didn't mention this, but let me now. Steve, when he was 8 years old or 9 years old, was fishing with a friend. So they were camping with their parents, and he and another kid were fishing in the lake, and they saw a UFO. and it scared them. They dropped their fishing poles and started to run, and they remember the UFO following them. And, of course, they told their parents about it, who had a good laugh.
Right.
But he remembered that vividly, and when he saw these UFOs in the Mojave Desert, all of that experience came crashing back from his subconscious. So one could certainly say that that it may be a coincidence that they ran into these aliens and this mining operation, or perhaps the mining operation was the side issue, and being back in contact with them, particularly Tom, was the real mission.
Yeah. Again, unbelievable. I can't even imagine what it's like to go through something like this. So, like in their case, I've talked to contactees, abductees over the years, read a lot of stories, read a lot of papers. But the scenarios, the mind experiments, if you want to call it, to me that's something totally new. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, and there was a definite realm to the life forms. So the lower beings, that just seemed malevolent and evil, seemed to be the lower life form. The clinicians seemed to be a higher life form, but then there seemed to be an almost deity, an angelic presence that was the highest life form, because once this female figure arrived, this Marian visitation type figure arrived, they just went away. It was like, the boss is here.
Yeah.
And that's another scenario. That's something that I've never seen or heard of before. But the hypnotic sessions were very, very specific about what they look like, why they're here, what they've been sent to do, and the fact that in our children's lifetime there will be a major contact between an alien civilization and humanity here on Earth.
Very, very interesting. Wow, like I said, enough to scare. When you were listening to this, were you a believer, Ron, of abduction or contact or UFOs? I mean, there's a lot of people that that don't believe it, and then to sit here and obviously this gentleman's credibility was there. You knew that.
Yes.
But I would say for you, just going through this whole thing and just recording hours and hours of it, and then putting it into a book, had to be interesting, to say the least.
Absolutely, and I would say this: when I went into this, one of the reasons I didn't want to do the book originally was because I looked at it as kind of, let's say, off-center, not mainstream, a niche-y sort of thing. But once I met these people, I was convinced that I had, by chance or good fortune, stumbled onto one of the most significant UFO alien abduction accounts ever recorded.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, again, it came forth to you that but again, many people, I know in today's society, as I've done this program, as we've done this program for as many years as we've people are getting more open-minded, and I think people are starting to, not that many years ago, and even in some realms, to talk about this type of stuff, you kind of get put into a category. You as an author and you as a very educated individual and your business and everything, I mean, to wander into this area is it's fringy, without a doubt. It truly is. But obviously you had to have a lot in your heart, and it had to be powerful enough that lets you walk it down this road, because it's going to change. Most likely it's going to change a lot of things for you. Maybe more people will come out and present things to you. Yeah.
My feeling was this too. I mean, I did a lot of research, and a couple of things that stood out in my mind. In the Mojave Desert, there are cave drawings from the Paiute Indians, and many of them, resemble like alien beings. But the cave drawings that I saw in the books are almost exactly what the Giffords described. And in the Mojave are the Mojave twins, which is this ground drawing that can only be seen from overhead. And the Mojave twins exactly look like the illuminated figures as the Giffords describe them, and they were drawn between 1,000 and 500 years ago.
Interesting. So they were pretty much in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, that's correct. There is another point I wanted to make about this communication, and Elise in particular was very vocal about this, and almost like she was channeling somebody else's message. But if you look at the early UFO photographs and whatnot, you'll see a disc-shaped object, fuzzy, grainy, that may be taken by a bad camera over the Himalayas from a plane or something. Mm-hmm. You'll hear in the 60s, early 60s, Betty and Barney Hill, who say that they saw a UFO. It followed them, and then they have this missing time. It's recovered, and they talk about many of the things that the Giffords talk about, being physically examined, etc. But one is a grainy photograph, and that's the early business. The other are recovered memories. Now you have full-blown conscious experiences with two individuals, again, pinching themselves, saying, do you see this moment-to-moment what's going on? And, for example, the Phoenix Lights in the mid-1990s, thousands of people watched for nights in a row and took photographs and videotapes of a UFO the size of a city, hovering over and moving past the city of Phoenix. Now, the governor at the time, Fife Symington, who was a fighter pilot in Vietnam and very familiar with military aircraft, originally as governor sort of made fun of the people that had reported these sightings and taken photographs, etc. But after he left the governorship, on CNN, it's on YouTube right now, Fife Symington gave an interview with CNN and said, I'm really ashamed of myself because for political reasons, I didn't tell the truth. My son and I were in a park, and we saw what those other thousands of people saw. We saw a UFO that was clearly otherworldly, the size of a city, that hovered, and we watched it for more than 4 minutes before it took off at an incredible speed, almost straight up. And he said, "I'm a fighter pilot. I'm a pilot, an amateur pilot. So I am very, very aware of what the governments are capable of in terms of aircraft, and this was nothing like anything I've ever seen or heard of before. It was otherworldly." It's on CNN YouTube.
Interesting. Well, so many people have seen so much, Ron, over the years. It just, I mean, of course, the government, whoever you want to call it. I mean, we hear about, Steve Bassett goes out, does these disclosure projects. And, it's such a tough one because more and more people, people in the government and the defense who are now aging, a lot of them reaching the end of their human existence, knowing that, they're not going to be around forever. I think a lot of them want to come out and talk about these things and let people know that there are things that exist and people are seeing things and that they're not crazy.
Exactly. Well, you've got two presidents that went on record, Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter. Ronald Reagan had 2 UFO experiences, and Jimmy Carter had a UFO experience with 15 others when he was governor of Georgia, and actually reported it to the Department of Navy and filled out a report that you can look at on the internet. Ronald Reagan, this was in Lucille Ball's autobiography, and Reagan mentioned it himself, but on Air Force One, he saw a UFO and had some of the people, his staff, watch it with him. But prior to that, when he was running for governor, he was going to a party at William Holden's house, the actor, and Lucille Ball was there. So the Reagan showed up a good hour and a half late, and Reagan told the group, according to Lucille Ball, that they had followed a UFO and watched it for quite some time, that it had changed colors. They described it. They followed it towards Bakersfield for quite some time, and then watched it shoot out over the ocean at some incredible speed that they wouldn't even know how to calculate. That's Ronald Reagan.
Right. Well, and another that more and more is coming to light, but the the relationship that President Nixon had with Jackie Gleason. I read more and more about that. Talks about how Nixon and Gleason were friends, very, very good friends. And the stories, call them what you want, of Gleason Nixon allowing Gleason to see alien bodies and alien crafts, said it changed Jackie Gleason's life forever. Of course, he was
I'd heard something of that. I do know that I do remember hearing and reading that Jackie Gleason was obsessed with UFOs, but no, I'd never heard about that connection with Richard Nixon. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I'll have to send you some articles. Matter of fact, I don't know if his wife is. I mean, she's quite up there in age, but his wife. His last wife has given a few interviews, and she talks about that, how it did change his life. And Gleason being a very in control individual from a very young age, in control his whole life. He was the band leader, he ran the show, he was the boss. And when he came across this, she talks about how his whole demeanor, everything, his whole life changed. He passed on shortly after, not long after that, but how he, the story talks about how Nixon had to share this with some people. And, of course, Gleason never really went out in the public with it, but with close friends and associates, he did share some things. And he said it was a life-changing experience. He couldn't believe what he saw.
Quite amazing. Actually, the way this book, of course, the Mojave Incident right now is #1 bestseller on Amazon in 4 different categories. But Betsy Lewis, who you might know, has a show,
had her
Rainbow
on several times. She's been on our program.
So Betsy Lewis, this book was originally self-published under the title Searchers in the early 90s, or mid-90s. And so Betsy Lewis bought a copy of Searchers, which is the Mojave Incident, that account, at a garage sale, put it on her bookshelf, and it was there for 20 years. She said she was working in her study, and the book literally fell off the rack. She picked it up and read it, and found it to be the most fascinating UFO book, alien abduction, she'd ever read. Called me about maybe 9 months ago, asked me if I'd be on her show. So I thought she wanted to interview me about my Jack Madsen novels. And she goes, no, it's about Searchers, or the Mojave Incident.
Right.
So I said, well, I mean, that's out of print. It was a self-published book. I'm amazed, you got a copy. There weren't many copies printed. She goes, no, this is the best. People need to hear about this. People need to hear this story. I went on her show, did an hour interview, and I took it very lightly, I have to say, because, again, I thought this was sort of a one-off, a red herring.
Right.
So the interview went great, but I had no idea the size of the audience she had. Next thing I know, Coast to Coast called, and, we're doing interviews, but it all came down to a book falling off her shelf, almost, serendipitously.
Yeah.
I mean, what a coincidence, don't you think?
For sure. Again, I've had Betsy on the program many times. Very interesting lady.
Lovely woman.
Very well spoken, and very interesting. We've got a big group that listens to us up at the University of Utah, Ron, in the engineering group, and Tracy writes in, says, Ron, by any chance, did the Giffords ever experience a MELAB attempt or scenario? People talk about where it's a government type abduction. Do they ever feel that, or were they so quiet about this whole thing that nobody really knew? Were they, when they went through some of these some of these things as far as regression therapy and that, were they ever approached by any government people?
No, this was really very confidential. I mean, basically they told their parents, and, they were looking for support, and they got it to this extent. Well, we're sure something happened to you. Obviously, it was really traumatic, but I don't think they believed that it was an alien abduction or UFOs. I don't know what they believed. and that really cut them to the quick. I mean, they were really hurt by that. And so that's one of the reasons they didn't want to tell the story. They were afraid, Tom was afraid it would ruin his career. And, they just didn't want to be labeled quacks. So basically, he told his very best friend, Paul Moran, and it was a circle of, a handful of people, and then me. But that's the extent of it until the book came out. And then, like I said, it was not a bestseller or anything like that. It was self-published, and really it was almost for them to have as a record of their experience. And then more recently, like I said, all hell is broken loose, and it's a bestseller. Nobody could be more surprised than me. But it plays into the scenario, all of this, that there will be a major meeting of civilizations in the not-too-distant future. And maybe in 1989, people weren't ready for this, but they sure are now. And this story really gets to the heart, very specifics of descriptions, why they're here, what they want, etc. And that's very, very unique and important, I think.
Interesting. Well, I'm dying to read the book. No, I'm not dying. I want to read the book. Let me rephrase that, because again, and my hat's off to you, Ron, on this. We've got just a couple minutes left. The hour went way too quick. Where can our listeners get this book from? Where can we get it from?
The Mojave Incident is on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble, of course. It's in bookstores. If you can order it directly from. If you go to my website, which is just very simple, Ron Felber, RonFelber.com. There's ways to enter an order right off the website.
Let me ask you this, Ron. Any chances, and I'm sure you've been asked this, any sort of a movie that could come out of this, or a documentary, and a movie or a television documentary?
Actually, we're just doing something with Paranormal Witness for the Sci-Fi Channel.
Okay.
And we were talking with Philippe Amara, who did Communion, about a potential movie.
Interesting. The Giffords, are they still in touch with you? Do you still talk with them?
Oh, very much so. As a matter of fact, there was a long hiatus, but these days, it's like meeting old college friends or something. Do you know what I mean?
And the
time goes by, and it makes the experience even richer.
Wow. Are they still to this day experiencing out of this world things?
Yes.
Wow.
They feel like they're watched. They feel like this has been something that is a lifelong experience.
So maybe a book or something, the Mojave Desert or the Mojave Incident continues, could even be on the future, on the horizon.
You never know.
Ron, I want to thank you so much for giving us time tonight. It was an honor to have you on the program, and I would like to reconnect with you, and I will send you some of those articles about Jackie Gleason, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Please do.
If I can send them through your author's website to you directly. I know I worked with Felicia. She was great to work with. But, yeah, I'd like to send some of that to you and let you review it and see what you think. And we'd love to have you back on. Maybe can schedule something up down the road with you and Betsy at the same time.
Oh, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
And your book, it looks like on Amazon there's a few left in hardcover. They're going for about $70 a piece. So you never know. You could get a nice steak dinner.
There you go. Hey, thanks so much, Pat.
Thank you, Ron. It was an honor to have you. God bless you.
And it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Take care. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.